Okay, so it is week 3. What are we doing today? We are going to go over assignment 2. So I have marked everybody's first assignment, as well as the weekly learning activity from last week, the lesson 2 discussion board posting. I apologize for the trouble that a few of you had with the link. And Luke, thanks again for letting me know about that. So I have marked everyone's assignment 1 project proposals, and I've marked that. So I'm going to give out assignment 2 today. It's due the weekend after Thanksgiving on the Sunday. That's lots of time. In truth, assignment 2 shouldn't take you more than maybe a few hours to do. And you basically have 3 weeks, so lots of time to do it. So we're going to go over that assignment shortly. Then we're going to spend some time. We're going to look at some of the scaffolding options. So some of the code generation options in Visual Studio for building Razor views, Razor being the name of Microsoft's view syntax. And then we're going to kind of poke around and look at some of the different, we've already looked at a few of the constructs in Razor view syntax, but we're going to do a little activity that is graded, but it's another really small activity. I'm going to give you time in class to do it, where we can explore a bit more of the Razor view syntax. And then lastly, we're going to look at, I know probably everybody in the class already has the software they need set up for this course to work with SQL Server. You have it already from your Comp2084 course last semester. But we're going to go over the process of setting up an SQL database, both on our local server as well as in the Azure cloud platform. I'm imagining we are not going to be a full 3 hours today, probably somewhere in the range of 2 to 2.5 hours to get through everything we want to, if all goes well. So let's have a look at assignment 2. It's now posted to D2L, which interestingly enough, found out a few things about D2L this week. They were in the news. Anybody hear at all about the parent company, Brightspace, that owns D2L? 2 interesting things about them in the news this week. Okay, well, number 1, did you know where they are actually based, where the company is from? I did not know this. The deal is correct. They are actually located in our Canadian tech hub of Waterloo. So Brightspace was a startup there, and they were in the news because they've announced their intention to have an IPO and go public because they have grown so much. So kind of a Canadian, local Ontario, big tech success story that D2L is one of the world's most popular learning management systems, really just our backyard right down the road in Waterloo. An IPO is an initial public offering. So this is where a private corporation generates shares and gets listed on the stock exchange. So when the IPO is done, any one of us will be able to actually go and buy shares in Brightspace, which is the company that makes D2L. Mason, that's an interesting question because I use both. Obviously, I use D2L for Lakehead and I use Blackboard. In general, the interface is much more modern and much better for D2L. Things like the calendar, much better in D2L. I find the grading, the final grades and grade weighting is much easier in Blackboard. And there's certain things like when I create certain items for grading in D2L, I can create them and set weighting, but I can't actually edit them. So if I have to change them, I have to delete the item and make a new one. They're very similar. D2L also offers a cool feature. Both of them, I can import from one course to another, which is very useful. So I've imported our course shell from last year, but D2L gives you a date offset. So if our course was on Monday this year, but I teach this course next fall and it's on Tuesday, I can say offset all the due dates by 364 days. And then automatically they'll be due on Tuesday next semester. So D2L has a couple cool features like that Blackboard doesn't offer. One annoying thing with D2L is the messaging Like I can't just send email. It all goes through my course link. It's not integrated with our email, which is annoying. In Blackboard, I can just send an email and it'll go to the student's email. In D2L, the email is self-contained. So kind of pluses and minuses, really. Overall, the D2L interface is great. But some things in Blackboard are better, I find. So let's have a look at assignment 2, which I've now posted. So it's worth 15% of your grade, and you are basically building the create, read, update, and delete functionality of the proposal that you submitted for assignment 1. So it's due Sunday, October 17th. So that's 3 weeks from yesterday. Okay, so you have 20 days, which is lots of time. You only need to submit 2 things to me. Submit the link to your repository. And yes, this can be the same repository you submitted for assignment 1. If you have trouble with it and you needed to make a new one, that's fine. It doesn't matter. Just make sure it's private, make sure you invite me, and make sure you put the link on D2L. And number 2 is the link to your live site, which will be published to the cloud on Microsoft's Azure hosting platform. And we will look at doing this in class next week. You have to do your own work. You cannot share code with someone else. And if I have concerns about your assignment, I will ask you for a one-on-one meeting where we will go over it. You're absolutely allowed to reference the code I post to GitHub, but it's reference only. You can't download it, change the words, and give it back to me. I'm not going to mark projects in that case. Can you use external code? Yes, subject to what I would consider reasonable limits. So if you find some code online that you want to use, here are the rules. Number 1, cite the source. So put a comment in the code with a link to where it comes from. Number 2, can't be more than 10% of your project. You still have to do most of the coding in the project. That's good news, actually, because Visual Studio is actually going to write most of your code for you in this assignment. Number 3, so in your documentation, not only should be including a link, but you should be putting in a bit of an explanation. You know, here's this code library I got from here. Here's what it does. And lastly, before you use external code in the project, just send me an email with the link so that I can check it out and say, hey, Rich, is it okay if I use this in my project? Here's the link. And I will email you back. So don't leave this to the very last minute. So the basics are, you're implementing your plan, you're creating a new project, you're connecting to SQL Server, you're publishing it to Azure. You will build model classes, and then you'll use some tools in Visual Studio to generate your database tables. You'll use other tools in Visual Studio to generate your controllers and views for you. So you're going to make a brand new project in Visual Studio. We've already done this twice now in class. So you're going to make a third project. You're going to pick the same options we've been using in class. So ASP.NET Core web application using MVC, and make sure you include HTTPS and individual accounts for authentication, because you will need those things for assignment 3. And it's very difficult to go back and add them in later on if you don't choose those options when you create the project. It's possible, it's a big pain, it's a headache, and it's hard to do accurately. In your project, you're then going to design at least 2 model classes, and there should be a one-to-many relationship between those models. So for example, let's just go and have a look at the project site for a minute. Okay, so let's see something like, I think this was Sammy's project. So Sammy, kind of an interesting project, application to track uniform jackets. And Sammy said at her workplace, they have uniforms, but it was hard to keep track of them. So Sammy was going to build a website that could be used at work. And Sammy, feel free to jump in. If I say anything wrong, correct me, okay? So in this site, we would have a model. We'd probably have a model for a jacket. We'd probably have a staff member model, and we might have a repair model. And there's going to be relationships between these. So for example, one jacket might be assigned to one staff member. One repair would be assigned to one jacket. One jacket might have one or more repairs. So you'll have to use your database skills to figure out the relationships between the models. Or in this project, for example, in Max's project, he'll have, an album model, probably an artist model, a song model, and he'll be able to work through the relationships between them. So one album will have many songs, one song will be on one album, one artist can have many albums, for example. So you'll define those models and those relationships in whatever way makes sense for the project that you're building. So all of the fields must have an automatically assigned unique primary key, and the child tables should all have foreign key columns. And the simplest way to do this is to build the models in Visual Studio in your project, like we did with our category model, and then you will be able to generate your tables automatically in the database using a tool called migrations. And we will work with this in class next week. You're then going to use another tool called MVC scaffolding, which is going to create the controllers and views, and those will actually be functional. They're going to have working C# code in the controllers, and they will have functional HTML and Razor syntax in the views. We'll actually play around with part of this a little bit today and then more into next week. Then you're going to have to make changes to your site layout. You're going to add links to your controllers in the nav bar. So again, for example, in Max's project, he might have links for albums, artists, and songs. Sammy might have jackets, members, and repairs. You'll add a descriptive title to the nav bar. In your footer, you'll put your name, your student number. And then on the home page, you're going to take out the boilerplate text that Visual Studio creates, and you're going to replace that with a description of your site. So if you're showing it in a job interview and someone lands on the home page, they know what it is. You'll commit regularly to GitHub. You must make a minimum of 4 commits spread over at least 2 calendar days. You also need a README file. Sorry, this should say your D2L submission. Update that. You'll publish the site to Azure. We'll look at how to do that again, probably next week. A couple opportunities for bonus marks. You can customize the theme. So do some work in the CSS. Make the site your own, make it look different than the template. You have to do more than just change the default font. Actually have to put some effort in for the bonus mark. You can also add an advanced .NET feature that we have not yet covered in class. And please list it in the README file so that when I'm marking it, I know you did some bonus work that I should be looking for. I can actually show you a project from last year that got full marks, including some bonus marks. So you get an idea of, what does a good project look like? So here's your rubric. Again, I'll give you I'll break down your grade, make notes anywhere that you lose marks. So the assignment's out of 24 with 2 possible bonus marks. So here's a project from last year. So the student got a bonus mark. She created a logo. She changed the font. She changed the color scheme. She introduced the project on her homepage. And then she had categories and recipes. These were the 2 models in her database with a one-to-many relationship. So one category could have many recipes, but one recipe would be in one and only one category. She added these links in the nav bar. So with categories, we could add, edit, or delete. And then with recipes, we could also edit, delete. She included the photo upload as well as the display of photos. She linked to her Git repository. Megan will come to your question in just a sec. So here was her repository. She had a nice README file explaining the project, how it works. She linked to the live site. And she had good commit names that were nice and descriptive, so I could follow along her workflow and see as she was working. Okay, working on the CSS today. Okay, working on file uploads, creating the nav bar, creating the README. So your commit messages should be descriptive. Yes, absolutely, Megan. So I don't want you to build like 10 to 20 tables. That would be way too many. So you need a minimum of 2 that are related together. If you need another 1 or 2 tables on top of that, that's fine. And you do not have to enable CRUD on all of them. You have to enable CRUD on sort of the primary 2. But let's say you wanted something, like a prices or locations table that was going to be static. Absolutely, just create the model so it goes in the database and you can populate the data, but the CRUD functionality is not required for every table. Excellent question. Okay, so this student got 100% plus bonus marks for this. So this is what I would consider to be a complete submission for assignment 2. It worked well, it looks clean, it's polished, it's professional. And actually, the student who did this is actually working for a local web company. She worked there on co-op. They liked her so much they've had a job waiting for her when she graduated. So she's actually working as a project manager now, helping run a number of their projects. Yes, it does. And it is the season for pumpkin pie. It's actually Scott's favorite. Scott runs on pumpkin pie and coffee. Are there any questions about assignment 2? Okay. So deal, you may want to, I will go over it briefly, probably be a good idea to refer to some of your notes back if you're confused about it from your relational database course that you had last semester. But the way that we identify what the relationship looks like between 2 tables is to ask ourselves from the perspective of one record in each table, how many records in the other table is it related to? So let's think about the recipe site example here. We've got categories and we've got recipes. We know there's some kind of relationship between them, right? So Adil, I'm going to ask you, for categories, for one category, how many recipes can be related? One recipe or many recipes? Right. So, and now from the perspective of a recipe, how many categories can one recipe be in? One category or many? Exactly, you've got it. So the relationship is one category has many recipes. So how do we model this in the database? Right, because we've got our categories and we've got our recipes. So how do we connect them together in the database given the nature of that relationship? So you almost think of it like a parent and child, right? One category has many recipes, one recipe has only one category. So how would you model that in the database? Yep, we would. So Adil, which table would get a foreign key? Does every category have a foreign key or every recipe have a foreign key? Which table needs the foreign key? Feel free to jump in, anybody. That's right. You got it, Adil. So every time we add a recipe, we need to basically tag it. We need to attach it to a related category. You got it. So in your assignment, you'll have to do the same thing. Okay. So again, if we go back, if I look again at Max's project, right? So Max is going to have to figure out if he's got albums, songs, and artists, he's going to have to figure out the relationships between them. Right? So one album has how many artists, one artist has how many albums, and that will determine which table gets the foreign key. And then same thing, he'll need to make a relationship between album and song. One album has how many songs, one song is on how many albums. And that will determine which table, what the foreign keys look like. Okay. If you're struggling, so this is part of the assignment for you to design your models. If you're struggling with it and you're not quite sure how to make the relationships that you need, then you can send me an email saying, this is what I'm thinking. You know, how is my data model? You can even design an ERD, an entity relationship diagram, like you did in your database course, and send it to me and say, you know, can you give me some feedback? Am I on the right track or do I need to adjust this? So if you need some guidance as you're doing it, then just reach out to me. Are there any other questions about the assignment? Setting up the models and the relationships is probably the most work you actually have to do, because Visual Studio is going to do the rest of the work for you, or most of it for you. But you'll have to think through your data model and relationships. Okay, I will leave the document open in case anything else, another question comes up to mind during the class. Feel free to use the chat and let me know, and I can bring the document back up and answer any other questions you have. And you'll want to do a good job and have a working version of this, because you're then going to need to build on top of it for once we get into assignment 2 and 3, we're going to be adding authentication. I know that, and I know from the discussion board post in lesson 2, a number of you said the thing you're most interested to look at to learn next is a security model. So we're going to look at how the security works in all of this. That will be assignment 3. But we need to have a working assignment 2 that you can build off of for assignment 3. Yes, Megan. The git ignore automatically, yes, it will exclude your dependencies. And when you use the template, the MVC template, it will add the git ignore for you. It will add the git ignore for you. Or sorry, if it doesn't do it at the time you create the project, at least it will do it when you create the Git repository. It will do it. So you don't have to worry about git ignore. It should be there automatically. Good question. Okay, so I'm just going to close down our sample project. And let's open up, well, just back into This will open up my week 3 folder back up. We'll come to that activity a little bit later. So let's open up our project. I guess it would be this one, right? The last chapter. I have to say, I can't remember who I need to give credit to for the name The Last Chapter, but love the name of our project. So take a bow if that was you. Oh, Luke, you shouldn't have admitted that. Clever nonetheless. Okay, so we're going to start without debugging. Yeah, we might. It's okay. We'll send the bill to Luke. So we'll start without debugging. So this is where we left off last week, right? We used our category model, we mocked up a list, and here we go. So we've created a few views in class over the first couple of weeks. In our first week, we created kind of our throwaway project. We created an about method in view. Last week, we created 2 new views. We created this categories index view and method. We also created a browse method. So far, we've been creating empty views, just basically empty pages where we can put whatever content we want on there. So if we're going to build static pages on our site where we're just going to hard code HTML content in, then we'll use those empty views. Most of the time, however, we actually use other templates. So we're going to go ahead and experiment with this. Just going to close up a few files here. So these were the files we created last week. We built the categories controller, which had our index method. Then we created the index view to show the list of categories. And we did 2 versions of this. Here we hard coded. And then we modified it we created our model class, simple category model, which we modified and we mocked up some data using this category model. And then we rewrote our code to have a model declaration up at the top so that we could loop through and display the data. And then lastly, we built this browse page that just received a variable in the view bag from the controller so we could spit out this h2 tag on the page. So we're going to create a new view in the project, but this view we're going to do differently. So we're going to go back to the categories controller. And let's create a new method here. Again, it will return just like our other controller methods. This should be starting to become familiar now. We're going to create a new method, returns a iAction result, and we'll call it create. And just like in our other methods, we're just going to return a view. So we talked, particularly in the first class, we've said that our URLs tend to be descriptive in .NET MVC. That if we look at the URL, it's actually a pretty good instruction as to what should happen at that location. So our location here will be categories/create. So we're going to return a view here. What should happen based on the URL? We're sort of translating it from plain English. What do you expect to see? What should happen at /category/create? Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Ivan. Thanks, Megan. We should be able to create a new category. So what should we display in the browser in order so that the user can do this? Exactly, deal. We need an input form. You got it. So we are going to build a view called create, but we're going to choose some different options from the empty view that we have been creating so far. So I'm just going to right click my method name. Actually, just before I do, sorry, I'll just save that change. I'm going to go here now and just try it out, right? So we got this message. We've already seen this message in our first couple of classes. This is to be expected. When we call a method that exists, the method tries to load a view and that view file does not exist. Then we get this view not found error. So we've seen this before. We know how to fix this. We have to go and now build the view with this particular name. So we're going to do it, but our process is going to be different than what we've done before. I am still going to right click my method name and I'm going to click add view. So last week when we created our categories index and categories browse, we were picking this first option, Razor View Empty, which Visual Studio describes as an empty Razor view. No kidding. This time I'm just going to pick Razor View. And notice the description on the right here, it's a bit different. A Razor view with or without a strongly typed model. So we want this option instead. So pick the Razor view and click add. The view name is copied from the method name because we want those to match, to follow the naming conventions. But now we have some other options here because this is not going to be an empty view. Notice under template, it defaults to empty without a model. So that's basically what we created last week. But if you click this drop down, notice we now get a list of different page templates. We've got create, delete, details, edit, empty, and list. So there are view templates baked into Visual Studio for all of the CRUD operations. And for read, we have two views. We've got list, which is basically what we worked with last week. That will display a list using the IEnumerable. And then we have details. So this is for showing multiple records. And we've got details, which is for reading or displaying a single record. So which template should we pick for our form? Which one of these 6 options describes the view that we want to build? Yes, of course. Thanks, Adil. So we want to use the create template. That now unlocks the model class box. So what type of model are we using? What kind of data are we creating with this view? So we're using our form to create. What do we want to create here? Thank you, Luke. We want to create a category. The data context, we'll work with that next week when we connect up our database. We're not going to work with that today. I'm going to make sure these 2 boxes at the bottom, the 2 at the bottom are checked. Reference script libraries, so that will include our JavaScript libraries. And use the layout page, yes. If we uncheck this, we're going to get a full HTML page, which we don't want because we want to use our layout template. And it says we can leave empty if it's set in the view start file. We looked at the view start file last week. It specifies that our layout page is the default. So we can just leave this box blank. So check those 2 boxes. We've got create, and category. We'll click the add button. And Visual Studio says it is scaffolding. So scaffolding is Microsoft's term for code generation tools, the code generation process. So a minute later, we have a form We've got a little bit of Razor syntax at the top. We've got mostly HTML with a smattering of server-side directives. We'll explore some of these a bit more. And then we've got our JavaScripts down at the bottom. So now we go back. What's going on? Why are we still getting this error? I can see the file, views, categories, create. Good guess, Mason. You're close. It's not actually cache. It's not actually a browser issue. We've added this file. We need to do something. You got it. So if we build the solution now, we compile it. Notice our DLL gets built successfully. And the views.dll. So this is the server-side code, the C#, but now we have this other DLL, the last chapter.views.dll. These are all our Razor views. They also get compiled. And now our view shows up. So our view, because we specified the model was category, it's given us inputs for both the category ID property as well as the name property that we defined in our model class that we built last week. Right here is the category model. We had a public class called category with category ID that was an integer and a string that was a name. So this file is functional. It even knows, notice here, we get the numeric inputs. And look at that. I type, and it actually uses jQuery validation to check my inputs on the key press event. I take it out. Now it tells me it's required. And all of this is done automatically, which is a huge time saving for us. Now, this form is not perfect. What other things should we do here in order to kind of polish it? What changes would you make to this form? If we went to the owner of the last chapter and said, hey, the create category page is done, here it is, what instructions would they give us regarding this page? Our category class had more. Yes, whatever is in the model, Mason. So if there's 20 fields in the model, they would all be generated here. Okay, Megan, that is a good point. Yes. Because when we're working with the database, when we scaffold, it actually will be hidden automatically. You're correct. So for now, it is here. You're right, it won't be. We're not going to modify the model for now, though. We're not going to add anything to it. So those would be for things like, I don't think those are really categories. Those would be fields that we might have. Those might be other models. Yes, but let's just work with the category model for now. Okay, yeah, how would we rewrite this? Chris, I mean, it doesn't look very good written in Pascal case. That's good in the code. Doesn't look so good to our end users, our customers. So what should we do with this label? Right, okay. So there's two ways we can do this, the quick and dirty way or the right way. And the right way is better. So the quick and dirty way would be to go into the HTML and we could change the label. So here's the label on line 16. Now notice the actual text of the label is empty. It uses this ASP4 directive category ID. So what do you suppose this code I've highlighted in blue does? ASP4 category ID. What does this code mean? Exactly. Thanks, Chris. So in the model, it's saying it's automatically, using the name of that property for the input. So we have the ability in our model to customize how that displays. We can basically add like an alias. So we could just, write the word category ID as we want it here. But by setting it in the model, that friendly name or alias will be available for any views that work with with this model. So I'm going to add an attribute in square brackets, display name equals category. Maybe I want it to display that way. So I'm going to put this above my category ID property. And yes, it does assign any input, but for the input, yes. Now, Visual Studio's complaining here. It says, can't find the namespace, display attribute, or display. But if I click my little suggestion box here, it says, well, hey, if you make a reference to the system.componentModel.data annotations library, this error should get cleaned up. So I'm going to do that. I'll just click that. I now have this new using statement on line 3. And now display turns blue, the word name turns black, and my red underlines go away. So if I save that change and go back to my form, oops, not exactly sure what happened with my server there. So I'll go to categories/create. And now it pulls, you can see the alias, the friendlier name comes. So this will be used globally on any label or heading. Wherever I'm printing out the category ID property, it will use this alias instead. Now, Mason had another suggestion. I mean, yeah, Mason, you pointed out part of the problem. There's no way to actually get to this page. So we could put a link in the nav bar. The other place we could put a link that I think I might put it instead is on the categories index page. Maybe here we'll just put in a link. I know it says shop our store, but we could put in a link on the index view that will load the create method. So I'm going to open up the categories index that we built last week. So you can find that under views, categories, and index. So underneath our heading, but above our list, we can put in a link that's put in our ASP action. Let's create, and this can say add a new category. So now as we're browsing around the site, whoops, back it there. Yeah, I'm really good with anchor tags. Awesome. So at least there's now a way to get to our new view. So I've added the link using ASP controller and ASP action that we should be starting to become more comfortable with. So now I can click categories on my nav bar. I can click add a new category, the link that we've got here, and then we get to our new page. Try that out. So I go to categories. Now I can click add, and we get our new form. It also automatically puts the page title of create up in the top of the browser tab. I think there are a few other minor changes we should make to our new category form. Can you see anything else on here that we should change? Yeah, the heading's kind of goofy. I agree, Mason, right? If we look, we've got an H1 that just copies the view name, and then we've got the model name as an H4 down below. So let's just make one H1. What should the heading say? We probably don't need the H4 tag. Yeah, we could just say create a new category. And then we can get rid of the H4. I agree. So get rid of line 9 and put a more descriptive heading in the H1 tag on line 7. That looks better. And yeah, Megan, we need some more validation, right? Because there's a few things I can do here in terms of my inputs that I shouldn't be allowed to do. So I can put in negative numbers. I can also, for example, put in a bunch of spaces, and I can actually submit the form. There's no validation warnings here when I do that. So again, the easiest place to do this is add the validation rules in our model. So let's deal with the negative number problem. What should be the lowest allowed category ID? And yes, Megan mentioned earlier, normally we wouldn't assign the IDs, but we don't have a database yet. So what should be the lowest ID? Yeah, we should allow nothing lower than 1. So we can use another one of these data annotations to create a range. And the two required parameters of the range function, min and max. So if we set the min as 1, and the max is, say, 9999. 99. So this will automatically now check any inputs, make sure they're within that, and if they don't work, it'll use jQuery. So if I put in 0, there's no. And you notice even the error message, it uses our alias. It uses the friendly name for the alias. As soon as I put in a valid number, jQuery validation checks the value again and goes away. Yes. So the annotations have to be above the property they describe. It's not at the top of the model. These annotations are related to a specific property. So both the display name and range, we are annotating category ID. So for name, we can put on a required annotation. We can also customize. So for example, we could set allow empty strings to false, which I'll do. So we'll set allow empty strings to false. We can also customize the error message. So without this, Visual Studio will generate its own error message. It'll just say that the name property is required. But if we want, we can actually customize any error. So I'll save this annotation. And now if I just do this, okay, my allow empty strings isn't quite working. I'll have to see what's wrong with that property. But notice it does show our custom error message here. And I can't submit the form. It's using jQuery to prevent a form submission until I've met all of the validation rules here. So the scaffolding gives us most of what we need, but we typically have to make these kinds of changes. Some of them are visual, some of them are more functional to make sure that the pages we're creating work as they need to. So they're probably 90% complete when we scaffold them, but they're not 100% complete. So our job is to then identify what customizations, what adjustments are required to the pages that we're scaffolding. Okay, it is 1:53. So I think we are due for a break. I will just use my Git changes window to push everything. So it's lesson 3, part 1, scaffold, create form. So when we come back, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to do some more examining of Razor View syntax. We're going to do this as a small group graded assignment. And then we will get our databases set up, 2 databases. Okay, so we will be back 2:05.